Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended lifeforms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution. Hey Bryan, what's this?
Hey Jeff, well, this is our discussion of Dirk Gently by the BBC TV.
Yes. The first series, I think, was released in 2010, was the pilot, and then the 3-episode series came out in 2012.
Okay. Great. So we're going to be talking about the BBC again.
Yes. Oh, wow.
Oh my
So is there
gosh.
anything you want to say about the series as a whole before we start diving into each episode?
You know, there's a couple of developmental things that I want to talk about as the program goes on, but as a whole, boy, I almost wish we could start our conversations by skipping the first 2 episodes. And not because I didn't enjoy them, because I did. I thoroughly did enjoy them. But when it comes right down to it, as you will go through the plot, both of them have storylines that are recognizable, which is good, for a fan, and maybe a little bit predictable based on our experience, So
Right.
That's why I kind of like the development as it goes along. So when you get to 3 and ultimately 4, which is episode 2 and 3.
Right. Yes.
Typical numbering thing with atoms, right?
Right.
You see some things that have potential.
Right.
And I really like that. Yeah, I think we can kind of just start where we're intended to start and move right down the chain.
All right. Well, I am going to start before we get into each episode talking about the cast, because I thought the casting was great.
Great.
Aside from being overweight and wearing a funny hat, the actor Steve Mangan is a very believable Dirk.
Right.
And, dare I say, an incredibly handsome gentleman.
Oh, now, is that a little self-serving? You gave away the plot before you even started the story.
I'll tell you about it when we get to it, but it actually wasn't until episode 4 that I made the realization that I look like Steve Mangan.
Which is interesting, because you asked me to take a look, just before we got started here, and I did. And I sent you a couple pictures from the screenshots as I was watching it, and I had to laugh, because truly there are moments when you can see your face reflected in his.
Right. It was pretty funny after it dawned on me, and I'm watching it.
But, it's funny, because I wouldn't have normally been able to associate that directly, because the character is different from yours.
Right.
And I typically associate, I want to say attractiveness. That sounds a little odd, but with character. I mean, for me, character and physical beauty are tied together very distinctly.
Right.
Which is maybe me. I don't know.
Makes no difference.
But once you said that, I'm like, yeah, there are moments when I can see his expression mirroring yours, and so the facial features, etc. You're absolutely correct. You do look quite a bit like him. Sans hair.
At least, yes. At least back then.
Yeah, that's true. also think it's a little bit funny, and we've had discussions about this before, but the other person that you see in his face, to me, is Seinfeld.
Well, it was in episode 4, and that is when I did the if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about Seinfeld before,
Right.
So it's interesting. There was some similarities there. Now, I'm not sure how the actor would feel about being associated with the two of you. but he'll never know, right? So
no.
We're good to go.
The character of Richard is played by Darren Boyd.
Mm-hmm. Excellently, by the way.
And I found him a little bit too bumbling and down and out than I expected. I expected him to have a little bit more on the ball because his bumbling from the book was because he was possessed.
Right.
This is his whole character.
Right. And that's why I forgive him that. And this is one of the areas I think we'll talk about through all of these episodes is how does the written character compare to the TV character?
Right.
Richard's character, you're right, is more bumbling, etc. in the TV show than he is as written.
Right.
But I do like him because I found him still likable.
Yes.
Which is one of the things we talked about before in the books,
Right.
We need a likable character.
Yes.
And his flaws are relatable, and his portrayal is well done in that respect.
Yes, very much so. About Dirk, I found him to start out in episode, we'll call it 0, very, very likable.
Right.
And then by the end of episode 3, he was pretty much just like he was in the book.
Right, exactly. That's what I was talking about. The arc of his character development is pretty well done, but as written, like you said just now, the first 2 episodes, not too parallel, but by the third, you start to understand where Douglas Adams was going with the character, and even the actor begins to develop the traits that we expect to see by the written character.
Yes. Okay, the character of Susan is played by Helen Baxendale, and she's pretty similar to her character, except she is not Gordon's sister.
A cellist.
Or a cellist, yeah.
Yep, I figured you would notice that right away.
And Jason Watkins plays Jilks, and he makes some very brief appearances throughout 3 of the 4 episodes.
Right, and I would have to say that I really wanted Jim Carter. I really did. I mean, for the development of Jilks, I really appreciated the actor's portrayal.
Right.
He is not as written in the book.
No.
But his portrayal in the TV show, much more nuanced. He's more believable as a police officer.
Right.
I mean, they do a lot of slapstick comedy, running around Benny Hill style kind of things. But they don't play that into his character development, but that's just what happens in the story.
Right.
So I appreciated his portrayal in this TV show, but I really wanted Jim Carter.
Okay. So now we'll talk about each episode. The first one is just called The Pilot. It was aired December 11th, 2010. And I guess what I'm going to start out with, which might be slightly different than you, is I think that this story is brilliantly fantastic. I loved The Pilot. I think this is my favorite of all the Dirk Gently stories that I have experienced. And I think Douglas Adams would be very pleased with this episode in particular, but very proud also of what they did for the whole series.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. It's a good pilot. It's a good show. The characters are developed nicely, quickly, and it made me want more.
Yes.
Which is the whole point of a pilot, I guess, right?
Yes, absolutely. So this episode opens with Dirk in the home of an elderly woman named Ruth. And he's explaining that his methods and expenses, including a new refrigerator, can be a bit difficult to understand, but he did explain that they're necessary. And he's being hired to find her lost cat, Henry.
Mm-hmm.
On his way home from that meeting, he runs across Richard McDuff, who is breaking into the lady's neighbor's house. It's the home of his girlfriend, Susan Harmison.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk calls Ruth and asks for his neighbor's phone number, and then pretty much what was done in the book plays out here. And
exactly.
I liked how they did it visually. It was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm. It was very good.
They updated this for the Times because he wasn't trying to retrieve an answering machine tape. He was trying to get her laptop because he wanted to delete an email that he regretted sending.
Right.
Dirk offered his services, and then he asked Richard if he knew where the lady's cat was.
Mm-hmm.
And then, out of the blue, Richard just goes, "Did you look in the warehouse?" Which, I'm going to say there was a little bit of a jump there because I don't know what would have prompted Richard to say, "Did you look in the warehouse?" But, but they go to the warehouse and they look around.
Right, right.
They see a lot of equipment, and they see computers in the middle of the room, all in that giant, empty, cavernous space with the little circle of tables and computers like is in every, I don't know, spy movie ever.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, there's cat prints in the dust on the floor, so Richard was right that there was a cat there.
Right, right. Now, I'll say in defense of that observation, Richard is familiar with the neighborhood. And therefore, he would know that the warehouse was there. So maybe he thought that the warehouse would be full of rats.
Oh, okay, yes.
That's where a cat would go, right?
That's exactly where a cat would go.
Yeah, the dust on the floor, and the cat prints, that was pretty well done. And of course, the little cat prints all lead up to what looks like a metal mesh piece that's on the floor that's attached with battery cables, that kind of thing.
Right. So they go over to all of that equipment, and Dirk touches one button, and then it starts a self-destruct sequence, which Dirk decided was just a bluff. And then he opened up what looked like a microwave oven, and it was packed with C4, so he and Richard got out of there.
Ran like hell.
Yes. Richard is going through a period of depression because he's recently unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
He was a business analyst for a power company who was made redundant 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
The warehouse they went into belongs to billionaire Gordon Way, and he happens to now be missing.
Right.
He's presumed dead in the blast, even though no body has been found. Susan learns of the explosion and calls Gordon to see if he is okay, and it just keeps going to voicemail.
Correct. One of the reasons they thought Gordon Way may have died is because his vehicle was parked directly outside of the warehouse, and it was destroyed during the bomb explosion. Correct. So they thought perhaps he had been in the car or the warehouse at the time of the explosion.
Right. And atomized or something.
Exactly.
So Richard goes to Dirk's office, and Dirk has a shiny new plaque on the entry door to the building.
Mm-hmm.
The actual door into his office has impact cracks in the glass. And Richard sees Dirk's secretary packing up her things and refusing to answer the phone as it rings.
Right.
Because she's quitting.
It's the infamous Janice.
Yes. Richard goes into Dirk's office where Dirk has a whiteboard with notes.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a board he paints over with white paint every time he starts a new case.
Right, which is absolutely funny, because to me, that's probably the one Easter egg that everybody will love, is as he's painting it, you see the words Electric Monk and Kubla Khan
yes,
drafted across the wall.
Yeah, so there were all kinds of notes on the board that you can see, and a lot of times I was pausing it so I could catch every one. Mm-hmm. But it said St. Sed's, And it says Cambridge dinner, and it had a quote from Kubla Khan. It said stuck sofa. It said salt cellar plus Greek vase equals happy girls. Of course, you mentioned Electric Monk. It also said bored horse and bathroom.
Right. So he paints all that over, wipes it all out as if it never happened. Which, yes, as we understand, never happened.
Right. And immediately kind of starts making notes, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
So that is some fast-drying paint.
It is indeed.
So Dirk explains again, this time to Richard, what a holistic detective is. Richard does not believe it, but Dirk says, and here you sit. So it's pretty funny how he's talking about the interconnectedness of all things, and here he is. So they have to leave to hack into Susan's laptop. On their way out the door, Dirk's secretary is back because she wants him to notice when she leaves.
Right.
And Dirk asks her to order Post-it notes, and she throws a stapler at him right as he's closing the door, and it hits the glass, making another impact crack. So now we know where all those cracks came from.
Right, exactly. And of course, the Post-it notes are a foreshadowing of things to come.
Right. So Dirk says all good detectives drive classic cars, so that is why he has the same car that he did when he was at university. And I don't remember what kind of car it was, but it was an old, kind of a compact car that hardly would start, and throughout the whole series he refers to it as his beautiful bitch.
Right, and he calls the car his princess.
Yes. So, since the car wouldn't start, they're walking, and Dirk told the story of his first cat case, which was owned by a group of scientists who were actually doing Schrodinger's cat experiment.
Except they were kindly not actually killing the cat.
No, just kind of gassing it a little bit.
Right.
So Dirk gives the laptop to a school kid and went to buy 200 cigarettes and a newspaper. Richard has to pay. In the paper, it says Gordon probably died in the explosion, but having been in the warehouse, they know that Gordon was not there.
Right.
The computer has been opened, and while Richard is going into her email to delete the offensive email, he notices there's one from Gordon. Richard says he did not know that Susan knew Gordon. And to try and figure out why Gordon was emailing Susan, they go to Gordon's therapist to get his file and do it with the ruse of acting like an insane person and pretending to jump out of a window. So that was a little bit humorous.
Yeah, the physical action of that was pretty funny. As Dirk was trying to get Richard to lie down on the ground, he was making the shape of a man having fallen out the window. It was kind of funny, you know?
It was a little reminiscent of the bulldozer.
Yes.
Like, what do you mean you want me to lie down right here on the grass?
No good joke goes unwasted, right?
No. So Dirk goes to Susan's clinic, where she is a doctor, and he's doing this under a guise of having a twinge in his shoulder. She asks him to lower his trousers, because in the human body, everything is connected. So that kind of left Dirk no choice. And she has him turn around, and he puts his hand on the table, and she's snapping the rubber glove on her hand. And then she lets him off the hook. And she thought that he was there to ask her about Gordon. She tells Dirk that every couple of years, Gordon asked her to marry him, and she kept turning him down because they dated at university, but he never had time for her, and she gave him an ultimatum, and he did not live up to that ultimatum. And on December 5th, 1994, he didn't show up for their date, so she ended it.
Right.
And Gordon said it wasn't his fault because he got hit by a car. And Dirk said he's used that excuse too a couple of times.
And now we're all set up for the classic timeline story.
Right. Dirk returns to Ruth's house, and sees a picture of her cat Henry. And she told him that that wasn't Henry, but that was George. And George just showed up one day running into her house, and she was never able to find the owners, so she kept him. And that was on December 5th, 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And then after George died, and he's now buried in the flower garden in the yard, she never expected to get another cat. But then she saw this kitten, Henry, and she just could not pass it up. And her husband walked out on her shortly after that. So basically everything you need to know about this cat story is right here in these last two scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
However, the first time I watched this, I wasn't trying to figure anything out. So the revelation at the end to me was really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Dirk shows Ruth a newspaper with the article about Gordon Way being missing, and she looked all distressed, but she denied knowing him.
Right.
And Dirk was fumbling with a tea and a biscuit, so he did not notice her reaction.
Right. And at this point, I have to say that they have played up the tea theme of this episode quite a bit. I mean, if you didn't know the story of Hitchhiker's Guide and the relevance of tea, by the end of this first episode, you'd be scratching your head going, what's the deal with all these teacups?
Oh, what's all the tea? Yeah.
But it's just to show you that only the English know how to make a good cup of tea.
Right. Richard, on the basis of breaking into Susan's computer, reading an email he wasn't supposed to see, finding Gordon's files at his therapist about his love for Susan, totally confronts Susan about Gordon and has a fight. Out of the blue, unprepared, he just walks in and lets her have it.
Right, right.
So Dirk pulls up to the warehouse, and Detective Inspector Jilks is there. And they kind of meet outside, and Jilks is all upset because he wants to know what Dirk is doing there, and not to mention the interconnectedness of all things. And Dirk said, I'm looking for a lost cat. And then smiles, this big grin. So Richard is back at Dirk's office, and he learns that Susan was not sleeping with Gordon. Dirk learns that Richard got a generous redundancy package from his company. Dirk then asks Richard what he was doing on December 5th, 1994. And Dirk then believes that the key to finding that out and key to finding Henry the cat wants to hypnotize Richard to find out what he was doing on that date.
Correct.
So Richard is hypnotized and reveals that he was shouting at Dirk for giving him exam question predictions that were all wrong.
Right. This is, again, not in line with the written story, but for television story, it's quite different.
Yes. And this is a flashback scene that they show where Dirk tried to get away from Richard, drives and reverses into Gordon Way as he was crossing the street carrying flowers. All of a sudden, Dirk says he knows where Henry the cat is.
Exactly. And perhaps we failed to mention, which I know we did, I did mention that they when they went into the warehouse originally, there was the metal on the floor that was attached to the battery leads.
Yes.
But one of the obviously important issues at that moment was Dirk looks down and picks up a rose petal, which happens to be on the metal plate.
Yes, yes.
And that becomes the connection that Dirk makes in his mind between Gordon, flowers, and the timeline.
Yes. Susan mentions to Richard that she is going to Ruth's. Dirk believes that she is in danger. So he and Richard go to Ruth's. And there Dirk explains the mystery of Henry the cat. Gordon was so obsessed with Susan that he wanted to make things right. Mm-hmm. And she told him, you can't, because what happened basically happened. Right. And the only way that he could do anything was if he changed history. So, of course, he built a time machine.
That's always the answer, isn't it?
Yes. And when he went back in time to fix what was wrong, he accidentally took Henry the cat with him.
Mm-hmm.
So, back in 1994, Henry was scared and confused and ran to where his home was in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth took him in and renamed him George. And then after George died, she bought the original Henry. So,
so he is the ultimate looping cat.
Yes. Oh, so that was wonderful. And the way he explained it, and really with the care and empathy in his voice, was truly fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that whole scene.
Mm-hmm.
But then it doesn't end there, because he gives her the bill and then asks her why she killed her husband.
Unfortunately, he does that before she writes the check.
Yes. Yes.
Which, I always question motivation here.
Yeah. Susan goes through the roof that he asked this question, but then Ruth confesses that it was because he was mean to her cat.
Mm-hmm. You don't mess with that lady's cat.
So while Gordon made it to 1994, on his way to Susan's, Gordon came across Ruth, who just killed her husband, and she killed him as well.
Handy frying pan in hand.
So that's why she reacted to his picture, because
Right.
she remembers the other guy that she killed that night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, they're all buried in the rose garden
Yes,
with the cat.
with the cat.
Oh.
Ruth mentions that she drugged their tea, and she was not going to go to jail, and they rushed to the hospital. And it turns out that they weren't drugged after all, and then they returned to Ruth's house to find out she committed suicide.
Correct.
Richard then explains to Susan that he invested all his redundancy money into Dirk's business to become his partner. Yet Dirk will always call him his assistant. Partner,
Right.
assistant, partner, assistant.
Assisted partner.
So I thought it was kind of hysterical how Susan is trying to say, why would you do this? And he's talking about the opportunity and how they work so well together. And she's like, so let me understand, right after he hypnotized you, you decided it was a good idea to invest in his business.
Right. And that flashes back to the post-hypnotic suggestion that Dirk gave Richard about how Dirk's business acumen will make everything work perfectly.
Yes. So Susan is going to Ruth's to sort her things out. And in the bottom of an old box, wrapped in a newspaper dated December 5th, 1994, Susan discovered Gordon's cell phone. And she listens to her voicemail on it.
And isn't it convenient that the battery has not died and all that
I
time?
want that battery. Holy cow. Well, Gordon was a genius. If he could build a time machine, I am sure that he could build
He'd
a
only
battery.
left the day before, so the battery was only a day old.
Yes. It was only a day old.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I do love that scene, though. I mean, obviously, Susan doesn't believe a word of any of it.
No.
I don't even think she's convinced that Ruth killed her husband and Gordon.
Or that was the cat, obviously.
Exactly.
Dirk is just taking her money.
Right, exactly. So she's convinced that all of it's a ruse. But when she gets the cell phone, she has to rethink it.
Right. Well, I would have to say that Ruth saying she poisoned them and then committed suicide while they were gone had to make her go, maybe there's something to this. Maybe not the cat.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting to me, and it goes to the motivation of all the characters, that none of them mentioned the jokes that maybe you should go out and back and dig up some of those flowers.
Right.
Because none of them want to accuse Ruth of having done any of these heinous acts.
Right. So this ends when he realizes that he was hypnotized into investing in Dirk's business that he's going to back out of it. And he
Right.
calls Dirk, and he's at a resort hotel in Barbados. And Dirk said he can't give him the money back because it's gone due to expenses.
Oh, fantastic. To do just a tiny bit of recap, I mean, and what I was saying early when we got started is that you've mentioned it over and over, that every bit of this episode has a fraction or a piece of everything that was written prior to it in the episode. I mean, everything is a reflection, if you will, of things that were done in the original story. So
Well, it's a pilot.
I know, and I love that. I love the fact that it did all that, and of course, it gave us that Easter egg of the whiteboard and the paint and all that kind of thing, which we all appreciated as fans. So it was intriguing, and like I said, after the end of the first episode, I wanted more.
Yes, absolutely. I loved this episode, and then when I discovered that there were 3 more episodes that were made after this a couple years later, I was like, oh, I can't wait to see these.
And oddly enough, I don't know if you experienced this, but I'd never seen any of these before. Had you?
Yes.
You have already watched them. Oh, okay.
Correct.
This was my first viewing.
Oh, really?
First, second, third, and fourth viewing. But
right, yes.
The first time I'd seen that series.
Yeah. So the first time you watched it this year was the first time you've watched it.
Yep. First time I'd ever seen it.
So then we get to episode 1, and this episode aired basically 2 years later. Opens with Dirk and Richard staring at a suspicious package.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard wants to call the bomb squad. And the phone rings, and it is a Mr. Edwards who has been calling them and telling them that someone is trying to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep telling him they will be with him shortly. Dirk pulls out a knife and carefully cuts the tape on the package. And inside the package is a small plush pig and a Valentine's Day card, even though it is April. And inside the card it says that they hate him and they call him a pig. And it's just totally scribbled. Pig, 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 I hate you, all inside this card. And they have no idea who it came from.
Right.
So they leave for Mr. Edwards' house, and they get there, and the door is open. And Dirk explains to Richard that Mr. Edwards is a hopeless paranoid conspiracy theorist who believes the Pentagon is spying on him and keeping him under surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that because he met him using his Zen navigation, which involves following a random stranger.
Right. They extend that whole theory to not only driving a car, but walking around after individuals.
Yes. Well, because his car rarely starts.
That's true.
So they find Mr. Edwards dead on the floor, and Dirk removes his business card from his wallet to avoid trouble, because if Jilks finds out that he knew Dirk or hired Dirk, that's just going to cause a whole lot of trouble.
Correct.
And he also removes a little pocket cash for expenses. Then there is a surveillance montage, presumably from the Pentagon, that concluded to terminate Dirk. And then it was also aborted because they thought he might be useful.
Correct.
And then they go to the credits. So now that the police have finished with processing the house, Dirk and Richard break in. They unexpectedly meet Mrs. Edwards inside.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk told her that her husband thought he was under surveillance. She asked if it was because of his work as a software developer, and Dirk said yes. She asked if he would continue working on the case, and if he would be discreet. And then, this is one of the best lines in the whole show, and I think this is right out of something that Douglas Adams would write.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk said he has been known to be so discreet that even his clients doubted he was working on the case.
Yep, that was a good line.
So while sitting at Mr. Edwards' desk, Dirk takes a roll of mints and then uses a pencil to shade the top post-it note, revealing the word reason. He then looks up at the wall, and there is a whiteboard with notes like Dirk uses in his office. On the top says, "I want to invade Switzerland." To figure out where to start, Dirk threw a dart at the board and said, "This is where we're going to start." The dart bounced off the board and landed on a ledger. And he's like, "Oh, well." And he didn't realize the significance of that at the time, which is kind of funny, because it's his whole thing.
Yes.
So Dirk asked Richard why anybody would want to invade Switzerland. And Richard answered that you would need a pretty good reason. And that clicked all the gears in Dirk's mind. And he figured out that the software Mr. Edwards was working on was a program designed to produce logical sounding arguments to support a predetermined action. Mm-hmm. So Dirk wrote a note on the pad and tore it off so the people after him would shade it and come to him.
Right.
There's a lot of pencil shading of notes on desks back then.
Yes, exactly. And of course he clears the desk, he just shoves everything else aside and leaves it right in the middle of the desk with the pencil on top. Not trying to make it obvious or anything.
No. So on the way back to Dirk's office, they realize that they're being followed, and they rush into the office and they grab heavy objects as weapons, and they prepare for an attack. And Dirk says, "Oh, we were not actually being followed. It just so happens that this woman, Mrs. Reynolds, was also going to his office because she wants to know if her husband is having an affair."
Mm-hmm.
When Dirk heard this, he rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, boring." So what happened to believing in the interconnectedness of all things?
It's only when it's convenient.
Right. But again, he was wrong because it is all interconnected.
It is indeed.
So because Dirk wants nothing to do with this, Richard interviews Mrs. Reynolds while Dirk is going to his wall and continues to work on the Edwards case. Mm-hmm. Dirk hears the woman say reason and then decides to take the case.
Right.
On a stakeout watching for Mr. Reynolds, they are being watched and photographed by someone in another car. Mm-hmm. When Mr. Reynolds and another woman come out, Richard follows the woman on foot, and Dirk is going to follow Mr. Reynolds in his car. Per usual, Dirk's old car has trouble starting, and while he's there trying to start it, Mr. Reynolds comes over to him and asks if he needs a lift.
Right.
So Dirk questioned him about giving him a ride, and Mr. Reynolds told him that his horoscope said that he would help a stranger. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He showed Dirk the cover of a magazine with a picture of Terrence Brown, and he said all of his horoscopes come true.
Right.
About a month ago, his horoscope said he would encounter a new romantic possibility, and then he met Maria, the woman who Richard is following.
Correct.
Richard is against charging two people for investigating the same case, and Dirk says that they are linked but separate cases, as can be seen because they are in two different files.
Convenient.
Yes. I would have to side with Dirk on this one, that they are not the same case. Right?
That is correct. They are not the same case.
So Richard's desk that he ordered arrived and was set up. Dirk was very displeased and leaves to get a pizza. And Richard fidgets nervously alone, fearing that those that killed Mr. Edwards would soon be coming after him. Richard was attacked. Dirk installed a surveillance predicting this event, and watching it back, Richard's chair at his new desk blocked the camera. So Dirk then destroys the chair in anger and discovers that the chair was bugged. So Mrs. Reynolds arrives and is told that her husband is indeed having an affair.
Correct.
And she cries, and Dirk has difficulty consoling her. And Mr. Reynolds also arrives and says that his horoscope said a dark secret would be revealed.
Just as it's revealed to his wife that he is cheating on her. Mm-hmm.
So again, even though at the end of this episode, to jump ahead and do a spoiler, that they talk about it's all of his horoscopes are not coming true. All of his horoscopes are coming true.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, again, here, just as written, they repeat the line about, do you really believe that planets that are moving thousands of miles away from you have an effect on your life? You know, the movement of planets, that whole typical Douglas Adams quote is repeated a number of times in here, and Dirk is saying that it's a ridiculous theory that horoscopes have any reality.
Right. So Dirk goes to meet Terrence Brown, and there he gets Brown to leave by causing a flood at his apartment. When he is gone, Dirk destroys and disables the computer system responsible for creating the horoscopes.
And I had to laugh. Only because, sometimes a little too much and that just bugs you. He's pounding on the network switches, not a server.
Right.
Easily replaced mechanical devices, not the actual server that would have been running the program.
Right. Just the link.
So that's kind of silly.
After leaving Terrence Brown's, they again were being followed. This time, it was Jilks. He wanted to know who Dirk was working for and was told Mrs. Edwards. Mm-hmm. Jilks informed them that she died last year in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk called the fake Mrs. Edwards and set up a meeting. And she falls over dead on arrival, having been shot in the back. There was a pretty good line here where, as she walks in, Dirk said, "You look pretty good for a dead woman."
Right.
to call her out on being an imposter. And then she falls over dead and thinks, wow, that was probably the worst possible thing I could have said to her.
I think she might have thought I was being sarcastic, is what he said.
Or something, yeah. So more shots ring out, and they leave the house after being shot at. And Dirk sees a white car that looks like it knows where it's going and follows it. They arrive at a pub. Dirk told Richard he sent Mr. Reynolds a fake horoscope about an extravagant headgear and an encounter with a rhinoceros.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk convinced him that it was not coming true because it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Correct. As Mr. Edwards shows up in a fez carrying a stuffed rhinoceros.
That he just couldn't pass up.
He did find it in the back of a van, I was like, well, I mean, how random is that?
So Dirk receives another Valentine's Day hate card, and since it was delivered by hand and he cut the top off of Richard's chair so it would not be in the way again, he would discover who was sending the cards. Dirk discovers a memory stick in the roll of mints with the Reason software. Mr. Reynolds arrived claiming he is going to die. He has no memory of the meeting at the pub the other day. Dirk connected the two men thinking they were going to die, and he also discovered Mr. Edwards was broke but believed he was rich.
Right.
So, somebody must be stealing from him. The man in the white car that Dirk followed the other day was Mr. Edwards' accountant who has been stealing from him. Mm-hmm. So, he killed Mr. Edwards.
Right.
He thought Dirk was hired to figure out who was stealing from Mr. Edwards, so he is there to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
He thought the woman pretending to be Mrs. Edwards was working for Dirk, so he killed her. He wants Dirk to hand over the evidence that proves he killed Mr. Edwards, so Dirk gives him the camcorder and runs upstairs after Mr. Reynolds.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Reynolds is about to jump out of the window, and Dirk informs him that his behavior, memory loss, and acute sense of smell means he has a brain tumor. And he falls out of the window, and he lands on Mr. Edwards' accountant, and the camcorder with the evidence of the identity of the sender of the Valentine's Day cards is lost.
Right. It's crushed to pieces.
Mrs. Reynolds arrives and refuses to pay Dirk's invoice.
Because he charged both of them.
Yes. So Dirk was pleased that he had the Reason software and would be rich.
Mm-hmm.
However, he discovered that he was pickpocketed and no longer has it.
So when they come back into the office, Richard is following Dirk, and Dirk goes into his office, and he's standing out there with Janice. And at that moment, Janice decided she was going to go to lunch.
Right.
So she heads out to lunch, and Richard comes behind the desks and kind of starts looking around at the stuff that's on the desk. And one of the things he finds is Janice's journal.
Right.
and it's there, and he kind of flips it open, and he recognizes the handwriting from the Valentine's Day cards, and then he's flipping back through it, and he sees where Janice has written, Janice Gently and Janice loves Dirk and all that. And then on other pages it says pig, you know.
Right.
And he goes to, you know, looking through the drawers, he opens up the bottom drawer and he finds 4 more stuffed pigs in the bottom of the drawer. And
right.
Just at that moment, Janice walks back in and says she forgot something. So Richard immediately finds out at that moment that it's Janice. And interestingly enough, and this is one of those things I've talked about, the character being written one way and the TV show doing it another way. Mm-hmm. Janice has this infatuation with Dirk.
Yes. On the radio, there was news that the USA has invaded Mexico. So they realized the Pentagon now has the Reason software.
Correct. It's here in episode 1 where they're discussing Janice's infatuation with Dirk, where you see one of the biggest variations in the story in terms of the written story. Because Dirk is written out as an overweight gentleman who wears a ugly red beret and has instant revulsion to beautiful women. And because of this revulsion, he tends to say disparaging and nasty things to them. Right. When he meets them. So he is, in the written form, not an individual who has women attracted to him.
Correct.
He's repulsive. Right. When it comes right down to it in the written form. And this is one of the things that we talked about. Right.
Incredibly
in this
handsome.
Story. Yeah, incredibly handsome. I'll give you that, since I'm going to be nice, you know. But in this television version, of course, the actors are always much more attractive than real people. Right. So we see this change in the writing style or the storyline in the last episode with Janice. It's unexpected to me. You know, I was surprised when we found out that it was her. And we also find out that her motivation for staying on, even though she hasn't been paid, is because she is attracted to Dirk.
Right.
And this is what she's most interested in, continuing her relationship with him, even though that she likes to throw stapling guns at him.
Yes.
So it's again here in the second episode, the third one we're going to discuss, where that particular aspect of his personality is also featured.
Yep.
I do love this episode, and this is one of the reasons why I thought it'd be fun to skip right over to this episode, because although there are Saint Seds is in it, and the relationship he had with one of his professors is in it, the story itself doesn't have any relationship to any of the other stories we've heard. That's a Dirk Gently story.
No, but this is a Dirk Gently story that I could see Douglas Adams writing.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the point. I mean, it's so on point that I really appreciate that. Man, if I could imagine that they could have written 8 or 10 episodes and stayed on point, that would have been exciting.
Right.
But I'll let you describe this episode as you so eloquently do.
Okay, thank you. So this episode starts out with computer code scrolling across the screen, robotics, security cams, and we are told that it is St. Sed's Institute of Science and Technology. And Dirk's former professor, Professor Jericho, is commending him on his ability to apply quantum mechanics to the social world. Dirk and Richard are there because they have been hired on as security, and the professor believes that somebody is stealing their work. We are introduced to 2 scientists, Cho and Ransom. And of course there's Max, this new form of artificial intelligence. And they also meet Elaine, a voice-activated robot who was named after the professor's daughter, who died in a car crash when she was 8. The first piece of business they do is to break into the Student Records Archive, because everything is connected.
Exactly.
And Dirk wants to find out why he was expelled.
Correct.
But his file is missing. All of a sudden, alarms go off, and it is discovered that the robot, Elaine, is missing, presumed stolen.
Correct.
When they could not find it after searching the campus, Dirk uses a stating the obvious line. So I always like how they slip in these little things that you recognize.
Mm-hmm.
So Susan is visiting Cambridge for a job interview, and this upsets Dirk. And Dirk's personality is changing a bit, and he seems to be angrier and angrier as these episodes go on.
Correct. This is where the character as written more directly corresponds to the TV show character that we see.
Yes.
But you also see, I don't want to say the acting is a little weak here, but some of his anger seems, I don't know, shallow, hollow.
Yes, I will agree. Yeah. It's not a believable anger.
Right. I mean, it's meant to be a comedy, so you got to allow for something, but I don't see his emotion attached to his delivery,
No, absolutely not. So we find out that Elaine disappeared while Ransom was running to get Professor Jericho because Max became alive and spoke to her.
Mm-hmm.
And Ransom presents a microchip giving them control of the building so they can further and more thoroughly do their investigation. The side effects are migraines, nausea, and diarrhea. So Dirk did not shoot it into his own arm, but shot it into Richard's hand.
Immediately. Without hesitation.
Yes. After a quick bathroom trip, while they're accessing email through the faculty security system chip, they accidentally gain access to Professor Jericho's email, and there was one read to them in Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that there's always something in these episodes that kind of bugs me and sits the wrong way of the believability thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at St. Sed's, we're in their Institute of Science and Technology, where we find out they have actually created sentient artificial life.
Right.
But they have the worst security chip system in the world.
Well, it is an institute of education, so it's not the military, it's not, a scientific institution. It's supposed to be a school, a college, so you're right. It was weak. And we only know that in part because the technology of the time that they were shooting this is obvious.
Right.
And out of date by decades now for us. So even though they are trying to show what is probably our future, it certainly looks like a distant past to us.
Yes.
When he's talking to the register on the wall.
Right.
It looks funny.
So they go to Jericho's office to confront him, but he's on the floor and he is dead. And Dirk is sad, and he said that the professor was the only person who believed in him. Mm-hmm. And he let him down. Twice now. Right. And he was not going to let him down again. And Dirk grabs a few things, leaves before the body is discovered, but they don't leave fast enough, and they are seen. So now they are wanted people who are running from the authorities.
Yep. Suspects in a murder.
Yes. So while they are fleeing, Dirk meets this girl, Jane. And she just happens to be on campus, and she walks with a cane, and she's very hungry, and she's looking for something to eat. And because the police are coming, Dirk says, "Let me join you," and whisks her away to the cafeteria.
Where they eat salt and vinegar chips.
Yes. I am completely taken with Jane.
Oh, yes.
This girl was an absolute gem.
Oh, she was.
I cannot believe that the character that she is playing could have been played any better by anybody else.
No, she does an excellent job. Excellent job.
So anyway, I just wanted to get that out there because we've now introduced that there's this girl, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And she does such a fantastic job. It is unbelievable.
That's right.
So back to the story. A voicemail came into the professor's phone that Dirk took. And it's in Chinese. And so they ask Cho to translate it, but he refuses, saying that he is too busy. They go to the lab, and Dirk uses the other thing he took, a brain-computer interface, and it can put his thoughts on a screen as text. And it was never finished because Professor Jericho embezzled the department's money, and they didn't have any way to complete the research.
Mm-hmm.
A new email came in telling them to back off. And Richard is having difficulty with the computer and threatens it, similar to what Zaphod did, of reprogramming it with a very large axe.
Mm-hmm.
So they discover that Cho is an imposter. And in trying to apprehend Cho tries to escape but runs right at Richard and gets punched in the nose.
Yeah, they have to do the broken nose. And at this point, of course, it's not our friend the nurse who adjusts his nose. It's actually Dirk, who claims he acted as a doctor for a few years and reaches in and grabs his nose and twists it around. And so we have that whole physical joke that we got in The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul.
Yes. So Cho says that he's not a spy, he's an orc. And he's playing an online game with Cho, who was an elf.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in love with Cho, but he got left for another.
Right. And then my favorite word, the homunculus.
Oh, yes. Yes. He left him for a homunculus. The guy
he got tossed for was a homunculus. Right. I love that word.
So he was paid to pretend to be Cho and told them that he once followed Jericho into his office, and when then he got in the office, Jericho was not there. He disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of a sudden the police arrive, and we realize that Cho, or the fake Cho, called the police, but they were able to get out before the police arrived.
Right.
I was disappointed that all the police were obviously the St. Sed's or Cambridge police, not Jilks. But
right.
Jilks couldn't be there because it's not his precinct. So this is the episode without Jilks.
Mm-hmm. So this is a reflection back on the original Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and it's the scene with Jilks at the gas station where when they're interviewing Cho says, well, I have to tell you something strange. And then Dirk says, well, I believe that the definition of strange varies widely.
Yes. Yes.
So again, they managed to squeeze that joke in there.
Yes.
And I just couldn't help but think of jokes at that moment.
So on the way to Jericho's office, the lights go out. While they are in a panic to get them back on, Susan shows up and the lights come back on. And I'm really not sure what that whole scene was other than to have some kind of a adrenaline pumping jump scares. Yeah.
So right after that light comes back on and we get that jump scare, we see Susan once again. And Susan informs them that she, in fact, has been offered the job.
Yes.
And that it's pending references.
Correct. In Jericho's office, Dirk leans against an empty filing cabinet and it slides through a hole in the wall. It is a hidden room decorated for a little girl, and the missing robot, Elaine, is in the bed. Dirk finds the missing file covered with paint splatter about his disciplinary hearing and learns that Jericho was the deciding vote that expelled him.
Mm-hmm.
So Susan takes great pleasure pointing out to Dirk that he is a patsy and that Jericho planned on stealing the robot, hired Dirk for security so he would be blamed when the robot went missing. So the Dirk got crushed by Susan.
Mm-hmm.
So Dirk is upset and he walks out and he ends up in a fish and chip shop, but he has no money. And he meets Jane again, who is hungry and orders about everything on the menu. She She talks to Dirk about his agency and tells him he is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
She also has no money, so they pretend to run out and they hide in a doorway, and when the shop owner runs out after them, they just slowly walk the other direction. So I was wondering how a woman with a crutch was going to run away from a shop owner, but they kind of made it believable.
Yep, they did. I do like that. And at one point in the conversation, Jane asks a question of Dirk, and before Dirk can even answer it, she's answering it.
Yes.
She makes the comment, she says, well, I think faster than I can speak.
Right.
And I love that comment. I thought that was really good.
Yes, it was very good.
And here is where the divergence from the written story, where Dirk tells the story of the somnambulant reciting of the answers of all the test questions.
Right.
Here he says the only one he got right was the one for applied physics.
Right.
And that was the reason why he was ejected from the school.
Correct.
Because of those correct test answers.
Yes. Exactly correct, like he said, down to the comma.
Yep, you got it. That's what he said.
But every other prediction that he made about every other test was completely wrong.
Right. Which, I don't know. I like the version where it was correct, you know?
Right.
Made more sense to me. Consistent.
So while Dirk is telling her that story, he confides that Jericho was the only one to believe that he didn't cheat, but now he doubts that. And
right.
Jane just leans over the table and gives him a kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk says a very, very true thing, which is a lot of times women are against having that happen to them, but men, on the other hand, rarely
object to being kissed by a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that was a good scene.
So Dirk told Richard and Susan to meet in Jericho's office. He tells them about Jane, and he is accused of being in love. He re-examines the case through the prism of love and realizes that his hearing was in 1994, and the file had pink paint on it, so the room must have been painted in 1994, 20 years ago.
Right.
And that room was actually a hospital room for Jericho's daughter, Elaine, who did not actually die in the car accident, but she has been considered brain dead and kept on a machine in that room for 20 years.
Correct.
So Dirk realizes that they have a missing body in need of a brain and a missing artificial intelligence. He talked to the real Cho, who said there was nothing wrong with the program they wanted him to fix, and talked to Ransom, who said her conversation with Max was about the lifespan of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, Richard and Susan are having problems because Richard, though he says he does not want to choose, is seeming to choose Dirk over her and does not want to move to Cambridge if she takes the job. So Dirk goes to the campus library and finds Jane just quickly flipping through books. He calls her Max. He asked her what the process of getting into Elaine's body was, and she told him that she downloaded herself into the robot, who then used the neural interface to upload into Elaine. And she was going to run, but after meeting Dirk, decided to stay. So they hide from the police in Elaine's hospital hideaway, and Dirk asks why she killed Jericho. She said she did not mean to, and she tried to explain to Jericho why she went into Elaine's body, but he tried to force her out. In the struggle, he fell and hit his head on the corner of the filing cabinet drawer.
Correct.
That is one of those believable, oh, if you fell and hit your head here, it would be over.
Right. right. The back of her head. Yep. Absolutely. He trips over the sofa and falls backwards into the...
Right. And then they show the filing cabinet open and the blood, and it's like, oh yeah, that had done it.
Mm-hmm. When they're in the room with Jane and Dirk is explaining things about what happened here, how the brain was transferred into the body of the young girl, Richard makes a comment about, well, she should be 8 years old. And I'm like,
right.
What the heck? Well, yes. I mean, mentally, you would imagine that she would be 8 years old because that's when she went into the brain dead state. But technically, the body that exists there today is actually 28 years old.
Correct.
So Dirk is not being some kind of weird pervert.
No.
Like Richard sort of implies there. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear.
And the brain isn't the 8-year-old brain. It's Max, the artificial intelligence.
Which would have an indeterminate age and certainly not be considered a child at that point.
Correct.
And in Jane's soliloquy about what her choices were, she says that she disavowed a silicone immortality for 70-odd years of life. So that was her choice to make, was to go into Elaine's body for just the few years, 70, she says here, that Jane will live, which means that Max, the artificial intelligence, will only live for another 50 years or so. And she was trying to explain that to Jericho when they got into the fight. And Jericho only wanted his 8-year-old daughter back. He didn't want someone possessing her body, so...
No. So Dirk turns himself into the police, but an anonymous tip set him free.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jane Elaine Max is leaving for the Australia region. It seems that Susan did not get the job after all. They had a change of heart. Susan tells Dirk how amazed she was that he helped Jane the way he did, because he is usually devious and self-serving. And it ends with the phone ringing in the other room and the secretary refusing to answer it, so it goes to the answering machine. And there's a message. Do you want to say what that message was?
No, you can say the message.
The message is from those who interviewed Susan, thanking him for his candor about her sexually harassing her patients.
And they say they dodged a bullet.
Yes.
But I do want to point one thing out here, which I think, obviously, at that point, Susan understands that Dirk is the man that she imagined him to be. Right. However, if we refer ourselves back to the pilot episode where he meets Susan, she does, in fact, sexually harass Dirk by forcing him to lower his pants and hold on to the bench while she snapped a rubber glove. But technically, Dirk was accurate in his assessment of Susan.
Yes.
Although it did end up only serving Dirk's needs, not Susan's.
Correct. When I heard the answering machine message from those that were going to hire Susan, and they mentioned sexually harassing patients, in my head, I went, well, that's kind of an odd, weird thing. But now that you pointed out that she did actually sexually harass them, it's fantastic the way they bring these things back. He paid her back for that joke. That was more him paying her back for doing that to him than it was to keep Richard. Because
right.
Richard is not a cash cow anymore.
No,
because he gave him all the money already, and he's employed by Dirk. So
he's poor as a church mouse, as they would say. Yeah. So it's interesting. So at the end of this episode, Susan is obviously in a position where she has no love of Dirk. And I imagine that a phone call back to the university could have cleared this all up. But of course, as we go into the next episode, we're left with the question, because Susan, of course, doesn't show up in that episode.
Right.
We assume that she figured out a way to get the job in Cambridge, and she went on with her life and left Dirk and Richard to their own devices.
Right.
Which, it's funny. We won't know, obviously, what happens beyond the next episode, because that's all we have to reference from. But as I said way back when we were first started talking about these books and these stories, the likable characters in these stories were limited. And in my view, they're still a little limited. Here, Dirk exposes all of his negative flaws.
Yes.
In this episode, we understand the nastiness that is Dirk. And we also understand the compassion that is Susan. And we understand the conflicted Richard. So those two and that storyline, for me, could have continued to blossom and change within the scope of the series had it continued.
Right.
But now we want to talk about the next episode.
Yes. This episode opens with Dirk in bed trying to access his answering service, but having no luck while the police, Jilks, is banging on his door demanding entry.
Mm-hmm.
As the police force themselves in, Dirk escapes out the window and drives off.
Well, this is one of those scenes that we talked about. This is the Benny Hill chase.
Yes, this is the Benny Hill chase.
Out through the window, across the rooftops, down the ladders that he set up all previously, that they were all arranged so that he could get away. And the state of his apartment is atrocious at this moment. I mean, they have
it is.
Many scenes that they're showing the condition of his apartment.
So Jilks goes to the office and questions Richard about their former clients. Because, right now, they have no current clients. 2 of their former clients have been murdered, and Dirk is the only connection that they can find between them.
Mm-hmm.
So Dirk pops out of the trunk he was hiding in and says that he was framed. And that obviously happened after Jilks left.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is an odd episode. In the relationship between Jilks and Dirk, it's odd.
Yeah. So as Dirk looks through a stack of eviction notice and final demands, he tells Richard he is trying to find his passport to go far away to a beach.
Mm-hmm.
A woman walks in, and Dirk can't believe it and tries to hide from her. And she seems to recognize Dirk but says she can't place it. And she comes there because she wants them to take her case because she believes that someone is stalking her. As the police come in, Dirk, Richard, and the woman flee out of the window and over the roofs. So again, more Benny Hill stuff.
Right.
And the woman is just going right along with it as she's being dragged all over because something like exercise gets the blood pumping and he thinks better when he's exercising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So once they get away, Dirk learns more about her case and puts her in a taxi. Dirk tells Richard that he has been doing an experiment about handwriting analysis and personality, so he is the one that has been stalking her. And Dirk found her by obtaining a bunch of insurance claim forms and analyzed the handwriting. They go back to Dirk's place, and it is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
He told Richard the more Elena refused to clean because she was not being paid, the messier he got. And he shows Richard a rug she put over a hole in the floor. And that hole was there for a whole different reason because he didn't pay a plumber.
Oh my gosh. At some level, when I'm watching this, and I do like this episode, I don't want you to get the wrong idea here, but at some level, I'm looking, it's like that old game we used to play, Mousetrap. You know,
yes.
So you had to establish that the rug was there. You have to establish that there's a hole in the floor. You have to figure out why a hole would be in the middle of the floor.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that just drove me insane here is, and you'll go through it. I don't know how you're going to do this, so God bless you for it. But the constant reference to the cleaner, the cleaner, the cleaner, the cleaner. Yes. And they're all different cleaners.
Right. The whole crux of this episode is based on the confusion of who the cleaner is that they're talking about.
That's correct. That's good to say now, because I don't know how we're going to get through the description of the story without understanding that that's a confusion.
So Jilks shows up at Dirk's place holding Dirk's passport. They have no idea how he got it.
I'm sure he just walked into the office and saw it lying there.
Yeah. He brings them down to the station and tells Dirk about 2 of his clients that were murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Jilks thinks Dirk is in danger, but not the killer. Even though his bumbling may eventually get somebody killed, he's not a killer himself.
Correct.
And Jilk suspects a ghost killer.
Mm-hmm. This is where the development of Jilk's character is good to me, because it shows that he's not incompetent. And in fact, there's even some compassion, although he is annoyed to no end by Dirk's foolery. He is at least compassionate enough to care about him living.
Right. On the way home from the police station, Dirk and Richard are thrown into a van by Eastern Europeans and taken. They are there on behalf of the cleaner. They break Dirk's finger and demand payment. And Richard loans Dirk money to pay Elena. So here again, we're going to do spoilers here so you can follow the story better. The cleaner they are talking about is not Elena. It is a different person that they call the cleaner.
Right. This is funny. I mean, there's two funny things in this particular scene. I had to laugh. After he breaks his finger, he's got it taped up with a couple of popsicle sticks.
Right.
And in the scene, as he's going through, Richard is sitting across at Richard's desk, on his broken chair, and Dirk is trying to use his laptop, and he keeps going, ouch, 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 ouch. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, so this is the little scene where he couldn't figure out why he had pain continuously
everywhere he touched.
Everywhere he touched until he realized he'd broken his finger. So that joke in its manifested form is that little ouch, 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 ouch.
Right.
And I was laughing to myself. But again, that's a joke for the inside fan,
Right. So back at the office, Richard and Dirk have a fight. Richard wants to know if Dirk has framed anybody for murder. Dirk said he wrongly framed a guy, Robbie Glover, for stealing Post-it notes, but while he was being investigated, it was discovered he was a murderer and went to prison. So technically, he framed a guy for stealing, even though he got convicted of murder.
Right.
It was during that flashback that Dirk reminded me of Jerry Seinfeld, where I went, oh, I look like this guy.
Oh, and of course, this is where the reverse temporal engineering takes place, because the job that Dirk was hired to determine was who was stealing office supplies, specifically Post-it notes, from the office. And in Dirk's mind, in order to determine who did that, he framed Robbie by putting a bunch of Post-it notes on Robbie's desk, and that precipitated the police looking into him. So it's in Dirk's mind that this is the reverse of his holistic approach to detective use.
Right. Because Robbie is now a suspect, they follow him to a store and then to a cemetery. They get discovered and they're confronted by Robbie, and he brings them into the church hall to show what he is doing. There is a group there called Ex-Cons for Jesus who are fixing up the hall. Dirk asks Robbie what his favorite book of the Bible is, because he doesn't believe that he's actually into all of this church stuff. And Dirk is asked if he believes in anything. Then he does this weird oration to make fun of Robbie and his beliefs. When he is grabbed by Robbie, he picks his pocket and takes his keys. When they're outside, they go through Robbie's car, and then he decides that Robbie is not the current killer.
Right. Now, you mentioned it, but I didn't understand it. Is there something here that didn't translate? I mean, what was that little speech, and why was he speaking in a funny voice? I mean, do we have any idea what that scene was about?
I have absolutely no idea, unless he was trying to pretend like he was an evangelist. But it didn't come off as evangelist. It came off as just, as I said, a weird oration.
Yeah, exactly. That was strange. That particular part kind of bothered me. I thought maybe if it was some kind of a movie reference, or he was trying to repeat some sort of line from a film or something. But I don't know. I didn't get it. It was weird.
Yeah.
And I wanted to choke him at the end.
it actually took me no time to queue up right to the point. So I am going to turn off my headphones and change to speakers. And then I'm going to play this so you can hear it. I'm going to try and turn it up loud too.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe in things.
Can you hear it?
Yep.
I believe in the laws of physics most of the time. I believe that everyone and everything is interconnected in a way that isn't always immediately apparent. And I also believe that one day we will all be brought to account. A reckoning that I've been trying to avoid my whole life. Because I know I'll be found wanting when I finally meet the Inland Revenue.
So, I mean, hold on here. I got to change this back.
Okay.
All right, I'm back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. Right. The only thing I could think of, and I don't think it was it, but I think you were closer to what the intent was there, because you hear the music in the background, the little organ music that they're trying to play, you know.
Oh, hold on.
Did you find something?
Yes.
I mean, a reckoning, the only thing I can think of is like Anubis when he tries to weigh your heart. But
I think you know how Google predicts what you are trying to say?
Yep.
Well, a reckoning I have been trying to avoid my whole life quote popped up very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because I already searched it and found nothing.
Found nothing.
So in his weird oration with this church music behind him and in this weird, funny, evangelistic type of voice, he says the line, "A reckoning I have been trying to avoid my whole life." And to me, it reminded me of The Godfather.
Right.
Because that's just kind of what it sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
But
mm-hmm.
I found nothing. I have found
no
nothing.
reference to anything in particular. Yeah.
No.
Just a bit of strange acting, we'll call it.
Yeah.
But like you said, it did provoke the response that he was looking for. He got the guy to try to choke him to death.
Yes, he did. So Dirk and Richard figure that their new client might be in danger, so they rush over to her house.
Mm-hmm.
And Jilks is there about her stalker. And Jilks believes they may be related.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk keeps insisting that they are not. And Dirk asks her to go on a date. And Jilks is investigating the stalker and discovers that there was a break-in and a folder is missing.
Mm-hmm.
And Jilks wants to dust for prints, so Dirk rushes over and touches everything. And then he eventually has to admit that he is the stalker and he's thrown in jail. A little while later, they find out another client has been killed, and Richard told Jilks about Robbie.
Right.
The woman dropped the charges of Dirk stalking her, and they set Dirk free.
Right. And I love that scene because, again, it's funny. Jilks still has some of the best lines in the show, I think. Even here, he says to Dirk, as he's releasing him from the prison, he says, "You know, Dirk, most people don't get a second chance. Please mess this up."
Yeah. So now, since Elena has been paid and she has quit, a new cleaner has arrived at the office, and Dirk sends her to his house and mimes that he wants her to clean. And Dirk gets a call and is told that Robbie is going to be released, and Richard and Dirk have another argument. And Richard tells Dirk he is going to see the case through, and then he is done.
Mm-hmm.
So Richard wants to quit, but he wants to finish this case out just because his clients are being killed. So he's not going to just leave that.
Right. And at this point, Dirk has done some analysis, he says, of Robbie's handwriting, among other things, and determined that Robbie is not the killer.
Correct.
Because of his handwriting analysis, which has already failed him twice.
Right. Well, he hasn't found out the first time yet.
Oh, that's true. He hasn't found out that it failed him the first time.
So Richard found a receipt for a storage unit, and Dirk goes to investigate it. And Richard watches Robbie handing out syringes to drug addicts for a clean needle program. At the storage unit, Dirk moves some boxes and finds a murder board.
Mm-hmm.
And Robbie finds him there and attacks Dirk. And
Correct.
Richard gets there and clubs Robbie before he can finish Dirk.
Once again, he gets close, though.
Yes.
Who are you cheering on, Robbie or Dirk?
Right.
Just kidding.
Yes. All of the furniture and everything in Dirk's office has been repossessed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being carried out while Dirk sits in a chair that he cut the top off of, which was Richard's chair for his desk. And Jokes tells him that Robbie has been arrested for murder.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk shows up for his date with the woman who's his client, but she tells him that she wants to try and reconcile with her husband.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk sees a note that she was writing, and the handwriting on it didn't match what he analyzed.
Mm-hmm.
The insurance form was filled out by her cleaner, and the personality does not match the handwriting at all. So Dirk leaves.
Oh, yep. There he finds out about his handwriting analysis skill.
Right. Richard tries to leave, and Dirk convinces him to stay. Dirk sees a picture on his board of one of the crime scenes and notices the arrangement of the pillows on the couch matches the pillows on his couch that have just been placed there by his new cleaner. He realizes his new cleaner is the killer,
Right.
and she tries to kill them and chases them.
Right. First, she tries to poison them with cups of water that she hands them, but Dirk realizes this and knocks the cup of water from Richard and then spills his own cup of water. Then she
Correct.
starts throwing knives at him.
Yes.
Which I thought was funny because we shortly find out that she's a professional ghost killer. Well, we found that out before, that they thought there was a ghost killer.
Right.
And since she's a professional, I don't think she would have missed.
No. No. As she is chasing them,
Mm-hmm.
she falls through the hole in the floor that was covered by a rug. Dirk explains that his secretary, since she was not being paid, signed up for a very cheap answering service to answer his phones. This answering service misdirected a lot of calls. Some went to the hitman,
Mm-hmm.
and any name on her machine would be killed. So anybody who called in and left their name and address was immediately on the list to be killed, and the cleaner wanted to be paid for all of those killings, but of course Dirk had no idea that this was happening.
Right. And of course, the cleaner's code name was the cleaner.
Yes.
So when you refer to the person cleaning his house as the cleaner and the cleaner, well, all those were the same cleaner. So as long as you know that, you know everything.
Right.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
But in order that they not know that she was the killer, she had to
Mhm.
frame Robbie.
Right.
So she framed Robbie to get all of the other clients out of hiding.
Right. She created the murder board. She used the syringes that Robbie had gotten. So
Right.
all of it now wraps up into a nice little bow.
Correct.
At the very end, they're leaving the ambulance, and Dirk has in his hand a reward statement from, I believe, Interpol,
Okay.
rewarding a great deal of money to the people who are able to find the cleaner.
Right.
So at that moment, then, Dirk realizes that he's about to receive a bunch of money. Unlike his typical character, he suggests to Richard that it's not his money, it's their money.
Right.
So Richard and he go wandering down the street, and climb under the crime scene tape and walk off into the sunset, thus ending the episode and, unfortunately, the series.
Yes. So Dirk and Richard reconciled at the end, but
Yes.
still no idea where Susan is or
Right.
what would become of her.
Right. Well, I wonder, like you said, though, now that Richard might be back in the money, I wonder whether Susan comes back.
All right.
Although that wasn't her original motivation. Although
No.
she's got to be quite confused now, because now she knows that Gordon was only delayed because Dirk ran into him, and that she was denied a job because Dirk, gave her a bad reference.
Yes.
So you wonder, but those are good questions to wonder about when you're dealing with an episodic TV show.
Right.
Speaking of episodic TV shows, Jeff, what's next?
Well, what's next is not an episodic TV show.
Oh, okay.
What's next is going to be our season 3 wrap-up, where we talk about all of the episodes that we did this year. Can you believe it has been 3 years?
3 years? No, I can't believe that. That's absolutely amazing. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I've enjoyed every one of these episodes, and I look forward to the review. So, Jeff, what can our fans look forward to in the first episode of season 4?
Well, I think we will start out season 4 with more Dirk Gently TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
They did 2 seasons, and the first season is 8 episodes, and the second season is 10 episodes, and there is no way I want to do 18 episodes in 2 of our episodes. So we're going to break each of those up, and we're going to do the first half of season 1 as the first episode of our season 4, and we'll do the second half, and then the first half, and the second half.
Great.
So a lot more Dirk Gently coming your way.
All right. Now, this one I've seen. I believe I've seen all of them, but I could be wrong. I know I've seen the first one because I remember you and I having a discussion, quite a while ago, about our memories of what we had seen on TV. And
Yes.
I believe that the actor that plays Richard?
I don't know if he's officially Richard in this episode, but he is the sidekick to Dirk.
Which is Elijah
Wood.
Woods. Right.
Yes.
We had talked about that. So I do remember him in the TV show, and I look forward to reviewing all of those TV shows with you. And I look forward to our season wrap-up coming up shortly.
Yes. So now that we know what's happening next time, I guess I have to say that this is the end.
So here at the end of the first... Make sure my sequence is going to get all messed up because it's a pilot, but let me try it again.
Right.
So here at the end of the first episode, which is the second episode since it's the pilot was the first,
Yeah.
and this one's called number 1, which is what we were just going on. So anyway.
Yeah, the pilot is called episode 0.
Right. Oh, okay. Episode 0 is the pilot, and episode 1
Yes.
we just discussed.
Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. And our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.